The clock on the dashboard read just past 10 a.m. when Raymond Carter pulled his black Lincoln Continental into the rest area off I-94, about 40 miles west of Lansing, Michigan. He wore a slate gray suit, a light blue shirt pressed sharp, and carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent decades earning respect. A slim leather portfolio rested on the passenger's seat, holding papers for a noon meeting with the governor's team, a policy roundtable on justice reform. Raymond, a district court judge for over 20 years, was known for his calm voice and unwavering fairness. He leaned back, scrolling through his phone to double-check directions, unaware of the white state trooper cruiser easing into the lot behind him. Its lights flicked on, red and blue cutting through the morning haze. Raymond's heart sank, not from fear, but from a tired recognition. He'd seen this script before, not in his courtroom, but in the stories of those who stood before him. Officer Jeffers sat in the cruiser, eyes narrowed. To him, a black man in a nice car at a rest stop spelled trouble. He radioed his partner, Officer Reich, who was a few minutes out. Without waiting, Jeffers stepped out, boots crunching gravel, and approached the Lincoln. Raymond, sensing the movement, lowered his window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, visible and steady. "Good morning, officer," he said, voice calm but firm. "Is everything all right?" Jeffers didn't answer right away. His gaze swept over Raymond, cold and calculating, like he was sizing up a threat. "We got a report of a stolen vehicle matching this description," he said, his tone clipped. "Seen leaving a gas station nearby." Raymond blinked, confused but composed. "I'm not aware of any report like that," he replied. "I stopped here to check directions. I can show you my registration." Jeffers ignored the offer. He stepped back, hand resting on his holster. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." His voice wasn't asking. It was commanding, laced with an assumption Raymond knew too well. He didn't argue. Trouble on a roadside wasn't worth it. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out, his 6-foot frame steady, his face unreadable. By the time Officer Reich's cruiser pulled up, Jeffers had Raymond at the rear of the car, hands raised. Reich hesitated, her eyes flicking between her partner and the man in the suit. She said nothing. "I'd like to know what I'm being accused of," Raymond said, his voice even, but carrying a weight that demanded attention. Jeffers didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the driver's door, reached inside without asking, and started digging through the glove compartment. Raymond took a small step forward. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," he said, clear and deliberate. Jeffers spun around, eyes flashing. "That's obstruction," he snapped. "You're interfering with an investigation." Before Raymond could respond, Jeffers grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back, and slapped on a cuff. Reich paused, then moved in, securing the other wrist. Raymond didn't resist. "You're making a serious mistake," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. A few travelers watched from across the lot. A young woman, phone in hand, started recording. An older man, a veteran, shook his head. "That guy doesn't look like a thief," he muttered. Raymond walked to the cruiser, head high, dignity intact, even as the cuffs bit into his wrists. In the back seat, he stared out the window, not angry, yet. He was thinking, planning, knowing this wasn't the end. Inside the state police precinct just outside Jackson, Michigan, Raymond Carter sat on a hard plastic chair, his wrists free but marked with red lines from the cuffs. The room smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. Officers moved around, their boots echoing on the tile floor, while keyboards clicked and radios buzzed with static. Raymond stayed calm, his posture straight, his slate gray suit still crisp despite the morning's chaos. He'd been there nearly 2 hours. No phone call, no clear answers, just waiting. He'd asked 3 times, polite but firm, to contact his office in Lansing. Each time, the officers brushed him off or ignored him completely. He wasn't yelling or arguing. He knew better. But his silence seemed to unsettle them more. To them, a calm black man wasn't just unusual. It felt like a challenge. Officer Jeffers passed by the holding area, glancing at Raymond with a mix of irritation and smugness. Officer Reich stayed in the background, her face tight, like she wasn't sure about any of this but didn't know how to say it. "Raymond Carter, I once," and she looked away fast. He didn't push. He'd seen this in his courtroom. Young officers following a lead they didn't fully understand. Around him, other officers noticed his polished shoes, his tailored suit, the way he sat like he belonged somewhere important. One muttered, "Guy thinks he's somebody." Raymond heard it, but didn't react. He'd heard worse over the years. Instead, he kept his focus, thinking about the meeting he was missing, the governor's roundtable, the work he'd spent weeks preparing for. "Mind telling us why you were parked with your engine running?" Jeffers finally said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. His tone was sharp, like he was fishing for a confession. "Were you waiting for someone?" "Casing a place." Raymond looked up, his voice steady. "I was checking directions on my phone. I had a meeting in Lansing." "That's it." Jeffers scoffed. "Everybody's got a story." Reich shifted her weight, her eyes on the floor. Raymond didn't bite. He knew what they wanted, a reason to push harder, to make this bigger. But he wasn't giving it to them. He'd sat on the bench too long, heard too many stories of people trapped in moments like this. He wasn't about to become one. Then Sergeant Pamela Yates walked in. She was older, her graying hair pulled tight in a bun, her eyes sharp like they missed nothing. She stopped when she saw Raymond. "How long's he been here?" she asked, not looking at anyone specific. "Almost 2 hours," an officer answered from a desk. "Obstruction. Vehicle match." Yates frowned. She stepped closer to Raymond. "Sir, have you been advised of your rights?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, but I haven't been allowed to call my office. I've asked multiple times." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not at him, but at the situation. Something about his calm, clear voice made her pause. "What's your name?" she asked. "Raymond Carter," he said, then added, "I suggest someone checks that name before this goes further." Jeffers snorted from behind her. "He's been acting like he's important since we got him." Yates shot him a look. "Enough." She turned back to Raymond. "Let me check something." She walked to a terminal, her fingers quick on the keys. Raymond sat back, silent, waiting for the truth to catch up. Sergeant Pamela Yates stared at the computer screen, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. The precinct's hum faded as Raymond Carter's name loaded, pulling up a profile that made her breath catch. Academic honors, legal awards, and then the big one, Judge Raymond L. Carter, presiding judge of the 14th District Court, State of Michigan. She glanced at the photo on file. Same calm eyes, same steady posture as the man in the holding area. She looked back at him through the glass, then at the screen again, her stomach twisting. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a disaster. She stood, her boots tapping sharply as she crossed the precinct floor. Jeffers was still leaning against the wall, smirking. Reich stood nearby, her face pale, eyes avoiding Raymond's. Yates opened the holding room door and stepped inside. Raymond looked up, his expression unchanged, like he'd been expecting this moment. "You said you had a meeting in Lansing," she started, her voice careful. "Yes," Raymond said. "At noon. A justice reform roundtable with the governor." Yates swallowed. "And you're Judge Raymond Carter?" He gave a slight nod. "That's correct." The room felt heavier. "Your Honor," she said, her tone shifting, "I'm so sorry. This should never have happened." Jeffers straightened, his smirk gone. "Wait, what do you mean, Your Honor?" he asked, voice cracking. Yates turned to him, her eyes cold. "You arrested a sitting state judge. No probable cause, no warrant for the search, and you denied him a phone call." Her words cut through the air. "This is bad." Jeffers opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Reich's face went whiter, her hands fidgeting. Yates ignored them and faced Raymond again. "Sir, would you like to call the governor's office now? Or we can drive you to Lansing." Raymond gave a small, tired smile. "Yes, I'd like that." "Thank you, Sergeant." She nodded and led him out of the holding room. The precinct went quiet. Officers at desks looked up, some confused, others embarrassed. The man they'd treated like a suspect walked through the room with a quiet power that made everyone pause. As Yates handed him a phone, Raymond dialed his office, his voice steady as he explained the delay. Outside, the morning light hit his suit, and he stood taller, like the weight of the cuffs had never touched him. By evening, a 27-second video from the rest area was everywhere. A college student had caught it all. Raymond, calm and composed, being cuffed by Jeffers while asking what he'd done wrong. Her voice in the background said, "This is crazy. He didn't do anything." The clip exploded online, first on TikTok, then Twitter and Facebook, with captions like "arrested for being black in a suit." It hit 500,000 views in hours, then 2 million by midnight. People shared Raymond's judicial profile next to freeze frames of the arrest, the contrast sparking anger. Hashtags like hashtag Judge Carter and hashtag RestStopProfiling trended fast. Raymond, still in Lansing, hadn't seen the video yet. He was focused, preparing for his meeting, but the world was already watching, and the story was far from over. The next morning, the state capitol's rotunda felt like it was holding its breath. Reporters crowded the marble hallway outside room 312, cameras ready, aides whispering into phones. The governor's staff and policy experts were already inside, but everyone waited for the oak doors to open. Raymond Carter's name was on every screen, his story spreading like fire. The viral video had turned him into a symbol overnight, and the Justice Reform Roundtable now carried a weight nobody expected. At exactly 10 a.m., the doors swung open. Raymond walked in, his dark blue suit crisp, his leather portfolio in hand. He moved with the same quiet dignity he'd held in the cruiser's back seat. The room went silent, not out of protocol, but respect. He nodded once and took his seat at the table's head. The governor, across from him, leaned forward. "Judge Carter, we're honored you're here," he said. Raymond's reply was simple but heavy. "Thank you, Governor." The timing speaks for itself. Before the policy talk began, Raymond asked to speak. His voice was steady, each word clear. "Yesterday on my way here, I was stopped, detained, and handcuffed by state police. No warrant, no real cause, just suspicion tied to how I looked." The room froze. An aide dropped a pen. A young assemblywoman's eyes glistened. "The video shows it," Raymond continued. "This isn't just my story. It happens to people without cameras, without titles. Unless we act, it'll keep happening." His words weren't loud, but they hit hard. The agenda shifted. What was meant to be a dry talk on training became a raw discussion. Experts showed clips, civil rights leaders joined in, and then came the twist nobody saw coming. The governor's legal counsel stood, face serious. "We're calling an emergency hearing today to review misconduct charges against officers Jeffers and Reich. Judge Carter, we ask you to oversee it as a neutral party." Gasps rippled through the room. Raymond paused, his mind racing. He didn't want to seem biased, but the counsel insisted. No ethical conflict existed. After a moment, he nodded. "I'll do it." By noon, the lower chamber was packed. Media, staff, a few community members who'd slipped in. Jeffers walked in, pale and tense. Wright kept her eyes down, her hands shaking slightly. Raymond sat at the panel's center, flanked by two other judges, his face calm but firm. "We're here to judge conduct," he said, opening the session. "Not to relive embarrassment, but to decide if actions broke legal and human standards." The hearing was brutal. Video evidence played again, showing Jeffers' rough handling, Raymond's calm requests ignored. Witnesses from the rest area spoke, a student, a veteran, backing Raymond's story. Body camera footage didn't match the officer's reports. Reich admitted she hadn't checked Raymond's ID. Jeffers stammered, claiming he followed rules, but his excuse about departmental discretion fell apart under questioning. Raymond stayed professional, his questions sharp but fair. Then came another twist. A second video surfaced from a gas station nearby, showing no stolen car report ever existed. The room tensed. Jeffers' jaw tightened. Reich looked like she might cry. Raymond's eyes stayed steady, but inside, he felt the weight of a system that had failed him, and so many others, long before this day. The chamber's air felt thick as the hearing stretched into the afternoon. Raymond Carter sat at the center of the panel, his dark blue suit a quiet contrast to the tense faces around him. Officers Jeffers and Reich stood before the judges, their confidence gone. Jeffers kept his eyes on the table, his jaw tight, like he was holding back a storm. Reich's hands fidgeted, her face pale, like she was finally seeing the weight of what they'd done. The room was packed, reporters scribbling, cameras humming, community members leaning forward in their seats. Raymond's voice broke the silence, calm but sharp. "We're here to find truth," he said. "Not to point fingers, but to see if justice was served or denied." He leaned forward slightly, looking at Jeffers. "Officer, explain why you ignored the suspect's request for a phone call." Jeffers stumbled, muttering about procedure, but his words sounded hollow. Reich, when asked, admitted she didn't run Raymond's ID through the system. Her voice cracked. "I just followed his lead," she said, glancing at Jeffers. The second video from the gas station played on a screen, showing no report of a stolen car. Murmurs rippled through the room. A reporter whispered, "They made it up." Raymond's face didn't change, but his chest tightened. He'd known suspicion like this his whole life, but seeing it laid bare, recorded, felt different. It wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd faced the same without a voice. A witness, the college student who'd filmed the arrest, spoke next. Her voice shook but grew stronger. He was so calm, just asking what he did. They treated him like a criminal for no reason. The veteran from the rest stop added, "I've seen a lot in my time. That man wasn't a threat. He was just sitting there." Each word built the case, and the officer's excuses crumbled. Raymond asked questions with the precision of a judge who'd heard thousands of cases. "Officer Jeffers, did you verify the vehicle's registration before the search?" Jeffers shifted, his answer vague. "I thought I had enough to act." Raymond's eyes narrowed. "Thought isn't enough. You need evidence." The room felt smaller, the officers smaller still. By 5 p.m., the panel was ready. Raymond read the decision, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. Officers Jeffers and Reich acted with negligence, violated protocol, and failed to protect the rights of an individual. We recommend suspension without pay, pending a full investigation by the state attorney general. Silence swallowed the room. Jeffers stared at the floor. Reich nodded faintly, like she'd expected it. Outside, cameras caught their exit. Protesters stood quietly, holding signs that read "Justice for Carter." No one cheered. The truth was heavy enough. Later that evening, at a press conference, the governor stood at a podium, Raymond beside him. The crowd was restless, reporters shouting questions. The governor raised a hand. "Today wasn't about revenge," he said. "It was about responsibility." Judge Carter showed the restraint every public servant should have. He turned to Raymond, who stepped forward. His voice was quiet but clear. "What happened to me happens to people with no cameras, no titles, no one to speak for them. This isn't just my story. It's a sign of a bigger problem. But problems can be fixed with truth and accountability." His words hit hard, like stones dropped in still water. A reporter asked if he was angry. Raymond paused, then said, "Anger doesn't fix things. Purpose does." As he stepped back, the crowd felt it. A shift, a moment where justice wasn't just a word but a call to act. The days after the hearing felt like a storm breaking. Raymond Carter's story wasn't just news anymore. It was a movement. The viral video kept spreading, hitting millions of views, shared by people who saw their own struggles in his quiet dignity. Social media buzzed with hashtags, #JudgeCarter, #JusticeNow. While community groups held rallies outside the Jackson precinct, their signs reading "Dignity in Cuffs" and "No More Profiling." Raymond went back to his courtroom, his routine unchanged, but the air around him was different. Lawyers, clerks, even defendants looked at him with new respect, like they were seeing justice itself walk through the door. He didn't talk about the arrest, didn't let it change his tone from the bench, but everyone knew. The story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been judged before they could speak. Inside the precinct, the mood was grim. Officer Jeffers sat in a review meeting, his face tight, his usual bravado gone. Officer Reich stayed quiet, her eyes red, like she'd spent the night replaying her mistakes. Sergeant Yates fielded calls from internal affairs and reporters, her voice steady but tired. The viral video played on every computer in the building, a reminder of what they'd missed. Younger officers whispered in the break room, wondering if this was the moment things might actually change. One said, "If they can do that to a judge, what about regular people?" Another nodded, staring at the floor. The precinct wasn't laughing anymore. Shame hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, as they waited for the state attorney general's next steps. Across Michigan, Raymond's story sparked action. Police departments started auditing old arrests, looking for patterns like the one that trapped him. Community town halls popped up, packed with people sharing their own stories of being stopped for no reason, their voices shaking but strong. Legal clinics offered free help to those who'd been wrongfully detained, their lines stretching out the door. Raymond's face, calm, composed, in that dark blue suit, became a symbol online, not of anger but of standing firm. Civil rights leaders called for reform, their speeches sharp with urgency. This isn't just about one man, one said at a rally. It's about a system that looks at skin before it looks at truth. The crowd roared, their signs waving like flags of hope. Back in Lansing, the governor pushed forward. At a packed press conference, he announced new laws, a statewide training program on de-escalation and bias, plus an independent oversight group to handle complaints against police. "We can't undo what happened," he said, his voice heavy, "but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." Raymond stood nearby, silent, his presence enough to keep the room focused. A reporter asked if he felt justice was served. He stepped to the microphone, his words simple but piercing. Justice isn't a one-day fix. It's every day, every choice, every time we choose fairness over fear. The crowd went quiet, his words sinking in. A young woman in the back wiped tears from her eyes, whispering to her friend, "He's why I believe things can change." Raymond didn't hear her, but he felt the shift, a spark of hope growing, fragile but real, in a world that needed it badly. 3 months later, a soft spring breeze moved through the flags outside the Michigan Law Enforcement Training Academy. Raymond Carter stood on the wide stone steps, looking out at a new class of cadets, 52 recruits in crisp uniforms, their eyes forward, shoulders squared. The trees nearby were starting to bloom, and the air carried a hint of change, not just in the season, but in something deeper. Raymond had turned down TV interviews and rally speeches since the incident, but this invitation felt different. It wasn't about cameras or headlines. It was about shaping the future, one cadet at a time. The academy director gave him a nod, and Raymond stepped to the microphone, his voice calm but strong, like it could carry through walls. The cadets watched him, their faces open, ready to listen. 3 months ago, he began, "I stood on the other side of a badge. I wasn't a judge to them, not even a man, just a threat judged by a glance." The recruits leaned in, some nodding faintly. "That moment could have made me bitter, but I chose purpose instead." He paused, letting the words settle. "You're not just here to follow orders or wear a badge. You're here to protect people's dignity. Every person, whether they're a father, a sister, or a stranger." His voice stayed steady, but it carried a weight that made the air feel still. A few cadets shifted, their expressions softening, like they were seeing their role in a new light. "Every choice you make matters," Raymond said. "Every stop, every question, every look. You decide if someone feels safe or scared." After his speech, the cadets filed out toward their families waiting beyond the training field. A young black recruit paused and turned back. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Raymond gave a small nod. "Serve with honor." The young man smiled, then joined the others. As the crowd thinned, Raymond stayed on the steps, the sun warm on his face. He wasn't thinking about the handcuffs or the precinct's cold chair anymore. He was thinking about the spark he'd seen in those cadets' eyes. Hope, not fear. The new training program, born from his incident, focused on de-escalation, bias awareness, and rights. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Across the state, departments were adopting it, and complaints were being reviewed with new scrutiny. Back in Jackson, the investigation into officers Jeffers and Reich had grown. Their suspension led to a deeper look at their past cases, uncovering mistakes and patterns that had slipped through for years. Jeffers faced a review board, his career hanging by a thread. Reich, shaken, had started meeting with a mentor, trying to understand where she'd gone wrong. Sergeant Yates, now a vocal supporter of reform, pushed for more training at her precinct. The changes weren't loud, but they were steady. Town halls, legal clinics, new policies spreading like ripples. Raymond looked out at the academy's lawn, the cadets laughing with their families, and felt something settle in his chest. Change wasn't a shout. It was a step, a choice, a quiet promise to do better. He turned to leave, knowing this was only the beginning, but believing for the first time in a long time that justice might just find its way. Raymond Carter walked down the academy steps, the spring sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The cadets' laughter faded behind him, but their faces, hopeful, serious, stayed in his mind. He'd seen something in them, a readiness to listen, to learn, to be better. Back in his courtroom, life went on. He ruled on cases, listened to arguments, and kept his steady calm. But the world outside was different now. His story had become a beacon, a call for change that echoed far beyond Michigan. Community groups held meetings, their voices louder, demanding fairness. Police departments faced tougher oversight, their training manuals rewritten with lessons from his arrest. The viral video, now with millions of views, wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror, showing a truth too many had ignored for too long. In Jackson, the fallout continued. Officer Jeffers' career unraveled as the investigation dug deeper, revealing a string of questionable stops. He sat in hearings, his face drawn, no longer the confident man who'd cuffed Raymond. Officer Reich chose a different path. She enrolled in bias training, her voice quiet but honest in meetings. "I didn't see him as a person that day," she admitted once, her words heavy with regret. Sergeant Yates became a leader in reform, pushing her precinct to change, to listen, to rebuild trust. Across the state, people shared stories, mothers, workers, students who'd faced the same suspicion Raymond had. Town halls overflowed, their signs reading, "Justice starts with us." Legal clinics grew, helping those who'd been silenced find their voice. Raymond's image, calm, dignified, lived on social media, a reminder that power didn't need to shout to be heard. One evening, Raymond sat in his office, the leather portfolio from that day on his desk. He opened it, flipping through notes for the governor's roundtable he'd almost missed. A knock came at the door. It was the young black cadet from the academy, now in plain clothes, his badge not yet earned. "Judge Carter," he said, nervous but steady, "I just wanted to say you change how I see this job. I want to do it right." Raymond smiled, small but warm. "You will," he said. "Just remember, every person you meet is someone's family. Treat them that way." The cadet nodded, his eyes bright with purpose, and left. Raymond leaned back, looking out at the fading light. He wasn't a hero, just a man who'd stood firm when the world tried to push him down. But that stand had started something bigger than him. The lesson wasn't loud, but it was clear. Justice isn't built in courtrooms alone. It lives in the choices we make, how we see each other, how we act when no one's watching. Raymond's story showed that dignity, even in handcuffs, could spark change. It taught us that fairness starts small, in a glance, a word, a moment of courage. He proved that one voice, calm and steady, could shift a system, not with anger, but with purpose. As communities rebuilt, as officers retrained, as people spoke up, the world felt a little less heavy. Change was slow, but it was real, growing in quiet steps, in the way we choose to listen, to learn, to do better. Raymond Carter walked forward, not as a victim, but as a builder of a fairer world, reminding us all that justice begins when we see each other as human.